Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pulseline Reports. Today, we're diving into a monumental shift in global politics. Donald Trump has returned to the White House, an event that could redefine American foreign policy and potentially shift the global balance of power. This isn't just a domestic win. His victory has implications that reach across the globe. From strengthening ties with some allies to intensifying economic competition with BRICs and reshaping U.S. positions on the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, Trump's approach could disrupt the status quo in ways that could ripple across world affairs. Why does Trump's return matter so much? If we look back at his previous term, we can identify clear patterns and priorities that he may bring back to office. Unlike conventional politicians, Trump often bypassed diplomacy for direct action, generating both results and tensions that have left lasting impacts. In today's analysis, we're going to explore how Trump's unconventional approach might shape relations with the European Union, influence NATO dynamics, impact the global economy, and affect key geopolitical conflicts. Stay tuned for a deep dive into how Trump's victory might reshape the global order and reimagine America's role on the world stage. Let's begin with one of the U.S.'s most intricate and influential relationships, the European Union. During his first term, Trump's stance toward the EU was notably tough, focused on putting America first. He prioritized U.S. economic interests and wasn't shy about criticizing European leaders on issues like trade imbalances and defense contributions, calling for changes that put European leaders in a challenging position. Trade wars and tariff battles. One of the biggest points of contention was Trump's decision to impose significant tariffs on EU imports, specifically targeting industries like steel and aluminum. Trump argued that these tariffs were necessary to protect American industries and reduce the U.S. trade deficit with the EU. This approach strained relationships with major EU economies, particularly Germany, one of Europe's largest economic players and a key exporter to the United States. According to The Guardian, if Trump reinstates and potentially expands these tariffs, we could see even greater impacts on industries like Germany's auto sector, which exports billions of dollars in cars and machinery to the U.S. Tariffs of this magnitude could hit Germany hard, affecting its workforce, trade balance, and overall economic stability, which in turn impacts the entire EU economy. NATO defense contributions, however, the tensions weren't limited to trade. Trump's stance on NATO contributions placed European leaders in a difficult position. His demand was simple. NATO members should increase their defense budgets to reduce their reliance on American military support. For countries like Germany, France, and others in the EU, this demand comes at a time when budgets are already stretched due to economic recovery efforts and ongoing energy challenges. Many European countries are still grappling with the effects of the pandemic and rising inflation, as well as the impact of energy crises fueled by shifting dynamics with Russia. Meeting Trump's demand for increased defense spending would mean cutting funds from other critical sectors or finding new sources of revenue, both challenging options for leaders who must also consider domestic concerns, strategic autonomy, and rethinking security. The situation has sparked a significant conversation in the EU about strategic autonomy. Politico EU and several political analysts have suggested that, in response to Trump's pressures, the EU may try to pursue a defense strategy that is less dependent on the U.S., aiming for greater independence in terms of military capabilities and foreign policy. Achieving this, however, would be a monumental challenge. It would require not only enormous financial resources, but also a high level of coordination among EU member states with varying defense policies and priorities. Additionally, moving towards strategic autonomy could mean a fundamental shift in how the EU approaches foreign policy, potentially leading to more regional alliances and altering the U.S.'s role in Europe. The long-term consequences of this are difficult to predict, but could lead to a more multipolar Europe, where reliance on the U.S. for security is replaced by a stronger European defense identity. Next, let's shift focus to BRICs, a powerful economic alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS has gained traction in recent years, with its primary aim being to establish a counterbalance to U.S. economic influence. The alliance has significant political ambition, seeking to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar and create an alternative economic bloc with its own systems and influence. Trump's hardline on China. One of the cornerstones of Trump's foreign policy has been a tough stance on China, which he sees as America's primary economic competitor. In his first term, Trump frequently criticized China for practices like intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and unfair trade practices. He took a strong position, imposing billions of dollars in tariffs on Chinese goods and implementing measures to restrict Chinese companies' access to U.S. markets. Now with China and other BRICs nations making concerted efforts to reduce reliance on the dollar, Trump could double down on these actions. He may expand tariffs, enforce trade restrictions, or take additional steps to curtail Chinese influence. Sanctions and financial measures against BRICs nations. According to Financial Times, Trump may take a tough line with BRICs nations that support alternatives to the dollar. One potential measure he could consider is imposing strict sanctions on countries that support the Chinese yuan as an alternative reserve currency or that actively participate in BRICs initiatives aimed at undermining the dollar's dominance. Such sanctions could impact relations with Brazil and South Africa and potentially complicate trade and investment in these regions. With BRICs pushing forward with alternative currencies, Trump's stance could heighten economic tensions and put the U.S. in a more isolated position in certain markets. A risky bet on India. To counter China's influence within BRICs, South China Morning Post suggests Trump might focus on building a closer relationship with India, which has maintained relatively neutral relations with both the U.S. and China. Trump may try to incentivize India with trade agreements, defense partnerships, or other benefits that encourage India to distance itself from China's economic orbit. However, this is a high-stakes strategy. If Trump's policies drive a wedge between India and BRICs, it could further divide the global economy into competing blocs. We might see the West, led by the U.S., facing off against a BRICs bloc with countries aligning along economic lines. The long-term impact could be significant, potentially leading to a more fragmented global economy where each bloc operates within its own trade systems and currency arrangements. One of the most pressing issues in Trump's foreign policy will likely be the ongoing war in Ukraine. Trump has repeatedly stated that he could end this conflict swiftly, hinting that direct negotiations with Russia may be the answer. This raises several important questions and potential risks that we need to consider. What would a deal with Russia look like? According to an analysis by the Washington Post, there is speculation that Trump might propose a territorial compromise in Ukraine. Such a deal could see certain eastern regions of Ukraine ceded to Russia in exchange for peace. This approach would undoubtedly be controversial. It would likely draw backlash from both Ukraine and European allies, especially Eastern European countries like Poland and the Baltic states, which view Russia as a direct and existential threat. Such a concession could be seen as validating Russian aggression and may encourage Moscow to take a more assertive stance in the region. Implications for NATO and the security of Europe. If Trump reduces U.S. military support for Ukraine, NATO and the EU may face difficult choices regarding their own security strategies. Traditionally, NATO has been the primary security structure in Europe, designed to prevent Russian expansion. A pullback from the U.S. could put NATO in a position where it must take on a more significant defense role, requiring European nations to increase military spending and build up their forces. This would not only require more investment in military infrastructure and training, but also demand strategic realignment within NATO. For countries already dealing with inflation and economic strain, the financial burden of increased defense spending could be a major challenge. The potential for increased Russian aggression. Should Trump choose to scale back U.S. involvement in Ukraine, Russia may see this as an opportunity to assert even more control. Moscow could interpret this as a lack of American commitment to European security and may attempt to expand its influence in Ukraine or even look beyond it. Such a move would destabilize the region, forcing NATO and the EU to reconsider their approach to Russia. Next, we turn to the Middle East, where Trump's policies had a lasting impact during his previous term. Perhaps his most significant action in the region was his decision to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. embassy there. Impact of unconditional support for Israel. According to Middle East Eye, if Trump continues his firm support for Israel, it could increase tensions with Palestine and the broader Arab world. This unwavering support may alienate Arab nations that have backed Palestine, potentially pushing them to seek alliances outside of the U.S.-led framework. Risk of shifting alliances in the Middle East. A report from CNN International suggests that if Trump intensifies his pro-Israel stance, other Middle Eastern countries may begin to distance themselves from the U.S. in favor of support from Russia or China, which have both shown willingness to play a more active role in the region. Trump's prior withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal has already strained relations, and returning to a hardline stance could lead to further escalation. There's a risk of new military tensions between Iran and U.S.-aligned states, making the Middle East a hotspot for conflict. Long-term implications for U.S. influence in the Middle East. If Trump's policies reduce American influence in the Middle East, we may see other global powers fill that gap. The stability of the Middle East is crucial for global energy markets, and any shift in influence could have far-reaching effects, particularly for oil-dependent economies. With the region being a focal point for religious, political, and economic interests, any changes in alliances could drastically alter the landscape of international relations. As we've explored today, Donald Trump's return to the White House signifies a potential shift in global geopolitics. His approach could redefine U.S. EU relations, reshape the global economy, alter the dynamics within NATO, and increase tensions with BRICs and in the Middle East. Each of these areas could face transformative changes, depending on how Trump's policies are implemented and how other nations respond. If you found this analysis insightful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think Trump's new term will impact global politics? Do you foresee a shift in the balance of power? And if so, where will it lead? Stay tuned to Pulseline Reports for more updates and in-depth global analysis. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.